Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Morton Blackwell. It is my pleasure to welcome you to this, our February Wednesday Wake Up Club breakfast. I don't know how much more of this global warming our country can survive, but we'll make do. We live in interesting times. This morning's Washington Times has a very interesting article, which looks like something that happened some time ago. The headline reads, "Pimp Video Stings Planned Parenthood." An organization headed by a young lady whom we know named Lila Rose, if you can imagine it, succeeded in sending people pretending to be a pimp and a prostitute to a number of Planned Parenthood offices, and they worked a sting on them, and they fell for it. I mean, after what happened to Acorn, you have to have a reduced estimation of the intelligence of these leftist organizations that they would fall again for this, which when it was done by James O'Keefe, managed to create such an outrage that the Congress passed and the president signed a bill that defunded Acorn, which was certainly a phenomenal circumstance. This young lady, Lila Rose, happened to be a partner in a similar operation that James O'Keefe did, actually during a period when James O'Keefe was working here at the Leadership Institute. Without our knowledge, he started this sting stuff while he was working for us, and Lila Rose went with him in those early times, but it's just astonishing. They claimed that the so-called pimp claimed that he was running a string of girls who were around 14 or 15 years of age and spoke no English, and they captured the clinic manager of a New Jersey Planned Parenthood, saying, so long as they just lie, that is, lie about their age, we just kind of play it stupid, she said. And then, as she was providing him and caught on camera doing it, providing the contact information for places that would do illegal abortions for girls 14 or under, she was caught on tape handing it to him and saying, "You never got this from me." I mean, wow, wow. In 2011, the Leadership Institute has already trained 551 students. Since 1979, at our training courses that we promote in our catalog, the Leadership Institute has trained over 91,575 people, and that does not include more than 4,200 people that we trained for Tea Party Patriots and Liberty Central online last year, our first adventure in that kind of online training. You have before you our school schedule for 2011. I urge you to take a moment and review that list of our upcoming schools and consider attending one or sending a friend to one of our programs. Now, my pleasure to introduce to you Chris Doss, who will offer an invocation and lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Chris is a Grassroots Activist Schools coordinator here at the Institute. He has been a faculty member here for 6 years and a staff member for nearly 2 years. Chris's professional work and interest in politics have taken him to more than 30 American states and nearly 20 foreign countries, where he's had the opportunity to meet and work with heads of state, members of national and regional parliaments, and a whole lot of political leaders. Chris, come on up, please.
Ladies and gentlemen, our invocation this morning is from the traditional Book of Common Prayer, a prayer for our work and a prayer for the work of our leaders. If you'll bow your heads, please. Almighty God, our Heavenly Father, who declarest thy glory and showest forth thy handiwork in the heavens and in the earth, deliver us, we beseech thee, in our several callings from the service of mammon, that we may do the work which thou givest us to do, in truth, in beauty, and in righteousness, with singleness of heart as thy servants, and to the benefit of our fellow man. For the sake of him who came among us as that one who serveth, thy Son, Jesus Christ our Lord, we pray also for the President of the United States, and for the governor of this state, and for all that are in authority, that all and every one of them may serve truly in their several callings to the glory of God and the edifying and well-governing of the people, remembering the account they shall be called upon to give at the last great day. We pray, O God the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. Amen. And if you'll join me, please, in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Well, thank you very much, Chris. Your prayer reminded me of an experience I had when I was 17 years old and in a summer school studying Spanish in Mexico City. My family are long Episcopalians for generations, and so I went to the Anglican Church there. And the Anglican Church has been around for hundreds of years and served people in the British Embassy there in Mexico City. The church looked as old as any of the old Catholic churches that I saw there. And when I got there, I found that they were using in that church the 1928 Book of Common Prayer that I was quite familiar with at home, and I realized that the service we were going to have was going to go through the liturgy, and there was a prayer analogous to the one Chris gave, which is a prayer for those in civil authority, and the wording in the Book of Common Prayer says, God grant to the President of the United States and to all in authority the wisdom to know and to do thy will. Well, I realized I was in Mexico City and that we were using an American prayer book, and I looked through, and it was the American prayer book, and the prayer did say, God grant to the President of the United States and all authority the wisdom to know and to do thy will. And I wondered, what were they going to say in this church in Mexico City? And it was with eager anticipation that I awaited that point in the service where that prayer had to be read. And the minister got there, and he said in a smooth and even tone, God grant to the Queen, the President of the United States, the President of Mexico, and to all in authority, the wisdom to know and to do thy will, which thank you for helping me recall that, Chris. I now present to you Amanda Prevette. She's going to give a report on Leadership Institute programs. She is Regional Field Coordinator for North Carolina, Tennessee, Virginia, D.C., Maryland, Delaware, and West Virginia. Amanda graduated from Elon University, with a bachelor's in anthropology. I guess anthropology, studying people, is analogous to useful in politics. She was the founder and president of Elon Conservatives and the Youth for Western Civilization chapter at Elon University, co-chairman of the Elon College Republicans, and the administrative vice chairman of the North Carolina Federation of College Republicans. Amanda?
Well, good morning, everyone. I'm actually going to talk about Conservatism 101, which is the latest project at the Leadership Institute. Does everybody have one of these brochures on their table? It kind of goes over the history and gives more information about Conservatism 101. It was started at the University of Virginia last semester, and it was really successful. We had 33 students graduate from the class, and the professors loved it so much that they actually want to make it a permanent course at the University of Virginia. Not only did we inspire the professors there, but we're also inspiring other students to bring the course to their campus. In fact, Brown University is starting their version of Conservatism 101 on their campus this week. So we're very excited about that. We're constantly working with other students to bring it to their campus, and we're very excited about the future of Conservatism 101. So I encourage you to look over the brochure, and if you have any questions, you're more than welcome to talk to me or Brian Burness.
Thank you, Amanda. I look forward to making a lot of progress with generating these courses which actually will teach for credit conservative principles. If you look at the course catalogs of colleges and universities across America, you will find enormous numbers of courses which in their official description make it very clear that they are leftist programs, studying sympathetically Marxist doctrine and all manner of leftist causes presented from a leftist viewpoint. And it has been our experience over the years that when there is a leftist abuse, such as a substantial number of overtly leftist indoctrination courses, and there, in contrast, is nothing that is avowedly or obviously teaching conservative principles, then it's almost impossible to defend the status quo over time if people are persistent. And we're looking for students who are going to be persistent to try to bring some balance in the course offerings. And now, to introduce our distinguished speaker, I'm going to invite Lauren Hart up here. As an external affairs officer, Lauren oversees the brand reputation and public image of the Leadership Institute while managing marketing and communication activities between Leadership Institute and our publics. She graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Integrated Marketing Communications from Abilene Christian University. She has an MS in Public Relations and a Master's of Arts in International Relations, both from Syracuse University. Lauren?
Thank you, Morton. Self-described as a Constitution-loving media brat, Mr. Todd Herman snuck into the technology business by first starting an internet radio company back in 1997. Known by many as a true visionary, Mr. Herman went on to direct advertising, marketing, social media, and business communication strategy for MSNBC Interactive, MSN, Microsoft, and most recently for the Republican National Committee. Mr. Herman has been praised by the RNC political director for creating a new technology platform that was the single most successful online fundraiser by a factor of 16 in the history of the RNC. Mr. Herman's social media-driven campaign provided a 100-to-1 return on investment that saved the RNC both time and money in their important get-out-the-vote effort. His team lifted email performance 40% and crafted a message that recruited a record number of Republicans in the 2010 elections. And now we're going to show a video of some of the work that he's done.
You've spoken directly to Tony Hayward, the CEO of BP?
I have not spoken to him directly, and
That feels strange to me. That here we've got the CEO of a company that's responsible for the worst environmental disaster in U.S. history. I'm just curious why you wouldn't pick up the phone and in some ways just give him a piece of your mind.
How's the golf game going?
no, I'm not very good.
I have no idea of why the attitudes are so hands-offy here. It's just unbelievable. They could be deploying people to the coast right now. He could be with the Corps engineers and the Coast Guard with these people in Plaquemines Parish doing something about these regulations. These people are crying. They're begging for something down here. And it just looks like he's not involved in this. Man, you got to get down here and take control of this, put somebody in charge of this thing and get this thing moving. We're about to die down here.
I'm just curious why you wouldn't pick up the phone and in some ways just give him a piece of your mind. Pick up the phone, pick up the phone, pick up the phone.
I hope he sees it now.
Please welcome self-proclaimed Constitution geek, media brat, corporate cat, dad, husband, and political operative, Mr. Todd Herman.
Good morning, everybody. It's an honor to be here. It would be disingenuous for me to take even full credit for that video or anywhere near that. Doug High, the communications director of the RNC, deserves a ton of credit for that. It was a group effort, but Doug really led that. And I will claim 100% credit for including Hey Jude at the end, which was a typical new media move. But by the way, if you listen again to the Hey Jude, if you listen really, if you play it backwards, he's actually singing Let Them Eat Cake. It is indeed an honor to be here, and I want to just point out a colleague of mine and the gentleman who preceded me at the RNC, and he's actually the distinguished one, and this is Mr. Cyrus Crone, who joins me from Seattle, is the RNC new media director before I got there. Cyrus, stand up and say hello to everybody.
Good morning, everyone.
We're going to talk today, or I am, about the president's new clothes, and I think we all know the metaphor I'm using. But before that, and it's sort of connected to what we're going to talk about today, I want to mention that I had the wonderful experience of getting to see Chris Matthews last night. He performs a small public access cable show on a nondescript channel. And Chris was at the train station suffering through a late train with me. And this was recent to his comparison of Tea Party members to the Muslim Brotherhood. Among other interesting things that Chris has said. And I tweeted, I don't know how many of you use Twitter, but on Twitter I asked, should I confront him about this? And a lot of people said I should. And I thought, well, I'm going to leave him alone. He looks like he's having a bad day. But then about 15 minutes later, a gentleman from across the room took his picture. And now, in Chris's defense, the gentleman didn't hear this remark, but I did, because I was standing right next to him, and Chris said, look at that idiot taking my picture. You know, where are these morons? Why can't they leave me alone? And so I said, oh, okay, I understand. So valor in me took a back seat to a desire to maybe make a point. And so I pretended that I had a Bluetooth, you know, those little annoying things people wear around on my head. And I said, honey, you won't believe it. Ed Schultz from MSNBC is standing next to me. And Chris said, look at it, morons! And I took my hand away. He could see I didn't have anything there. I said, you know what's funny? A moment ago you were annoyed for being recognized. Now you're annoyed for not being recognized. What actually makes you happy? And about 25 people laughed and several people clapped, and then Chris found it a convenient time to go get on the train. There's a point to the story. There's a point, and I hope it'll become clear. The topic of the conversation today is about a free internet, and let me be clear about what I'm not talking about. I'm not talking about an internet free of intellectual property. I'm not talking about a world where computer code is everybody's property. Open source is great. I love it as a technology movement, and open source simply means making your code available to other people so that they can act upon it and improve upon it. And that is, those are choices that people make in technology. But when I'm talking about an open internet, I mean unencumbered by government. And this morning, I hope to convince you this morning that this is not only a winning political strategy for us, it's a moral obligation. It's a moral obligation as conservatives, it's a moral obligation as Americans that we protect as much as possible an internet unencumbered by government regulation in any form. And that is at risk. It's deeply at risk. And first of all, it begins with why this is a winning strategy and why I think it is a huge wedge issue for conservatives versus progressives. And it begins with the President of the United States. As the leader of the Democratic Party, it begins with him. And it's interesting what you learn about the president when he's on TV as often as he is. I have learned that skepticism is President Obama's kryptonite. And you're familiar with Superman, the kryptonite weakened Superman. If you look at the president when he's being questioned, he visibly shrinks. When he's being sharply questioned, he either becomes angry or visibly shrinks, as in, honey, I shrunk the presidency. And you can think to the ABC infomercial for healthcare. You can think about Paul Ryan's challenging of him in public. You can consider the November elections where the president's response was a non-response. Right? So we learned this about him. We learned something else, though, about the president. He will not give up. He will not give up in a quest for control of everything. He will not give up in a quest for attention. And something that I find remarkable and related to this morning's topic, and that I don't think has gotten enough comment, is please keep in mind that this is a president who chose to target media people. I just did, but I'm not the president of the United States. Not only Rush Limbaugh, not only Fox News. Remember, the president had the tenacity to speak in public at a college campus and but demand that these students turn off news so as not to be distracted. This is also a president who made a public claim that he himself has divorced himself from media, and he said, in fact, I don't even know how to use an iPod. If that's so, someone else is pushing the buttons on his iPod when he jogs, as many photos show him wearing one as he jogs and golfs. Extraordinary. So why the challenge of the media? I'll tell you. It's because it's one piece of the puzzle that the progressives have yet to really own. Now, I do believe that there is a slant in media, but they don't yet own it the way they own other things. And so if you observe the president's march for control, the cap and trade bill dies in the Senate. It is reborn in the EPA. Difficult things like redistributing justice are hard to sell publicly, and so they happen through planned obsolescence or planned negligence within the DOJ, or seem to. The goals never stop. You think about the oil spill that we just showed. How many times was the administration told, no, you cannot ban offshore, or you cannot ban offshore drilling, and how many times did they try to go around that? Right? The march continues, and it will not stop. I was just chatting this morning with a friend of mine who got to meet the president, and I was fantastically thrilled to hear that the president was genuinely nice, was genuinely open to chatting just as the guys. I hunger for good news about the president because, like most Americans, I like him. Like most Americans, I find it difficult to dislike my president, but I also like him as a person. The policies disturb me deeply. And what is most disturbing to me now is, let's map back just a little bit about the president. Wants to control his public image, as all presidents do, is willing to go directly to war with the media, will steer around inconvenient judicial rulings, will take them out of the body of the people and put them into the hands of unelected bureaucrats to push them through, will not listen as people say, no, we don't want you to take control of healthcare. So what is the president? What have I arrived at? I believe that President Obama is the perfect progressive. And this is what I mean. Skepticism being his kryptonite ties back into his political DNA. For the perfect progressive believes that progressive governments must not be questioned. That it is a perfectly rational statement for a progressive government leader to say, I have saved or created 42 million jobs this morning over breakfast. And that must not be questioned. The numbers must not get in the way. The details must not get in the way of the vision. And I think that what's getting in the way of the president's vision are some details that are inconveniently being raised through new media. And let's examine this for a moment and the president's desire for control pressed up against a medium that is very, very difficult to control, the internet. When the president has encountered in the blogosphere, and a term that my friend Roger Simon says not to use anymore, in blogs, in digital media, is something where he can no longer, through a meeting or a breakfast with one of the 3 major networks, achieve share of voice. And just to put this into a purely mathematical way of looking at this, there was a time, not long ago, that one appearance on a news program could impress, and I'm not kidding, 72% of television-owning Americans in 10 minutes. That is no longer possible given the advent of new media. Furthermore, the president cannot reach out to each one of these people who writes. And as it's gone from blogs and just people who are really committed to writing online down to Facebook, he simply can't impress all the Americans. He simply can't control opinion. And he simply can't control message. No one can. And I think if you map that back to the president's perfect progressivism, will never stop, does not want to be questioned, skepticism is his kryptonite, you start to get this feeling that this must make the president incredibly uncomfortable. And I'm certain he would disagree. I'm certain he would say he's the biggest proponent of this because, after all, he's the social media president. But is he? One of the things for which Organizing for America is famous in our circles is getting people to send robo-notes. You know what a robo-note is? It's my phrase. It is a made-up note from a fake person sent to newspapers and published as real. He succeeded in getting 400 or 500 of these fake letters written with the same 2 names, published in newspapers. That was his use of social media, right? Was the absolute carbon copying of a message under deceptive delivery put into these publications as if a real person was going through this healthcare crisis, written from his communication shop. Social media? And so the president is faced with this situation now where there's a medium that genuinely cannot be controlled. Now, I take his word. I honestly take his word when the president says that he wants Egypt to turn the internet back on. Right? I have to take his word. What's he doing here? You guys can relax, because it seems that the FCC, who ostensibly works for the president, is going to step in and solve this problem I know you're all worrying about, and that is the lack of content online. Right? I know you've noticed an incredible lack of diversity and inability to find what you want. There's just not enough web pages. Right? There's not enough content, and it's not being distributed fairly. Have you noticed that? Don't you worry about that a lot, that content is not being distributed fairly? Amazon.com is not getting fair treatment. Right? Local blogs are not getting fair. It keeps me awake at night. The FCC has stepped in now under the guise of something that is only Washington can name: net neutrality. And so what is net neutrality? This is Washington, D.C. stepping in to companies like AT&T and Comcast and saying, you know what, we've got to make sure there's a fair playing field here. We've got to make sure that content is flowing fairly and that nothing is being discriminated against. Well, that's interesting, because I didn't see anyone in here particularly concerned that content was being discriminated against. And if we're talking about neutrality, raise your hand if you are able to buy the notion that neutrality is provided by the government. Right? I understand it's for sale, but when neutrality is for sale, right, how neutral is it? So we have the FCC, who has had a mandate to take care of the airwaves. Why? Because they are publicly owned. Right? They existed before us. It's like dirt. We're talking here about fiber owned by companies, by private companies who have spent their money to put it in the ground. And by the way, interesting sort of side fact, there is more spectrum, transmission spectrum, available in the dirt than in the air, right? Far more, and surprises some folks. So the FCC now, think of this, everything is moving to broadband. Everything is moving to a transmission device that they don't really have a mandate to control. And so what do we know about government agencies? Their first instinct is to survive and thrive and grow. And so faced with a couple of things now, we have a president who leads a party who himself is perfectly progressive. We have a party who has followed in his footsteps being perfectly progressive. We have Speaker Pelosi's decision to cast aside the careers of a full generation of moderate Democrats in favor of refusing to admit the errors of Obamacare and the attempts at cap and trade and the stimuli. We have that combined now with an FCC who stands ready to begin to regulate flow of information. Now, this is a new type of flow of information. That is just as much as broadcast as it has to do with information between you and I. Now, do I think the president has it in his mind, in his heart, or in his roadmap to legislate what we say online? I don't. I genuinely don't. I don't think that for a second. Do I think that the eventual outcome could be that? It could be. Sounds like a paranoid vision. Remind yourself, though, that there are more than one legislator who wants bloggers to have to register as lobbyists. I said bloggers, not journalists like Chris Matthews, who's a journalist. Why then do we face this circumstance? I will tell you that part of it is self-preservation from the FCC. Part of it is a party that is so built on command and control mechanisms that we may as well make the branding statement of the Democrat National Committee more government, please. And now, though, they're faced with not only something that's difficult to control, but the internet is interestingly self-replicating. And this is what I mean by that. As the power of technology increases, the ease with which you can communicate increases too, right? The ease with which you can become a media channel increases. And this is, I think, where they face their biggest challenge. Lauren, in her kind remarks about me, was kind enough to mention our little internet fundraiser called Fire Nancy Pelosi. Here's a little trade secret. That program that raised $1.7 million in 3 days, when we spent $17,000 on advertising, you wanna know how it got started? Literally got started by people I met on Twitter. I called them. And about 20 of them teamed up with me, but those 20 people had access to nearly 2 million people online. And they started it overnight, and those 20 people deserve a lot of credit for raising $400,000 overnight. Oh, wait a minute, we can't have this. This is not possible. So the Democratic Party, the President of the United States, desire for control, command and control, more government please, meets now the internet. We have seen in Egypt and we've seen in Iran, and I hope that you agree with me. And conversely, weirdly, I think that somewhere the president agrees with this, that the internet must be a moral obligation to keep open, right? If you think about these circumstances in Iran, and many of you may have watched that online, I certainly did and participated with it and watched Americans on the West Coast offering people in Iran help to not go to this hospital or that hospital because the secret police were there. We've certainly seen that Egypt learned from that and immediately shut this down. So I think we can recognize the moral obligation of letting people have this person-to-person communication device. I don't think I need to sell that too hard. And again, weirdly, I believe fully, if I were to sit down with President Obama, he would wholeheartedly agree. But here's where it gets a little bit sticky. If that thing, the internet, is allowed to be free, what happens in a center-right nation where center-right people have no need for any leftist media? And I mean genuinely have no need. Because there was a time, and with every day that goes by, that time gets further away, where we had to go through certain media sources with whom we did not agree. That day is over. Something else symptomatic to this. Remind yourself, the President of the United States, his administration, at least not him, but his administration, floated the idea of government bailouts for newspapers. You can read that as government ownership of media. So I think that there is a recognition. I believe at the highest political level, there's a recognition that as Americans get more access to the ability to communicate, to start their own blogs, to start their own opinion mechanisms, to steer around what has been the dominant media, which has been easy for politicians and quite frankly of both stripes to control. We know this. To influence through coffees, through access to the White House, to making sure you're in the press pool, to making sure that you get to sit up front at the presidential meetings, right? It has been that possibility of control that has existed for so long, and now it is getting etched and etched and etched away, and as share of media not control, but as share of voice of media drops, I think one party is facing something that is cataclysmic. And that is that in a center-right nation, center-right Americans communicate with themselves around these dominant media choices. And you can see it in the organization of the Tea Parties. You may know this, you may not. Started online, very quickly went to the phone call, and you're talking about 3 or 4 people really got something started, 5 or 6 or 7, organized, and yes, I know there was Dick Armey and there were other people who jumped onto that to help move it forward. But the people who genuinely got that started did it as Americans, and it became a political force quite suddenly, something that the president had to attack and use Alinsky tactics with. So in this center-right country that believes in small government, that believes in freedom, that believes in the liberties that we hope to protect, when we have this ability now, one party is more threatened than the other. And so, the Democratic Party. I believe that the Democratic Party and the president cannot ever stand in favor of an internet unencumbered by government regulation. Because by being perfect progressives, led by a perfectly progressive president, having washed out the moderate Democrats, command and control is name of the day. And so our side of the political spectrum has with us an opportunity. There's a generation of people who will grow up having known no time when there was no internet. Very, very quickly, a generation of people will arise who have never in their lives seen live TV. Very, very quickly, and in fact, present with us now is a generation of people, 22% of whom trust advertising, 92% of whom trust word of mouth association with a product through Facebook. We are living in this time now, right? And as these generations go on, they get more and more used to this. Well, I will tell you, this is why I think this is a winning political issue for us. The president's new clothes that I hope that he will wear is the leader of the party who believes that Americans have too much choice in media. That Americans have too much of an unencumbered ability to consume and produce information. And that the very idea that a communication mechanism unencumbered by government decision-making about who gets what share of a channel and which source of traffic gets precedence is untenable, cannot be allowed to continue. I hope that the president's party will wear that label. And here's why. If you would like to talk about redistribution, honestly, redistributive powers, there has never been one greater than the internet. If you would like to talk about minority media ownership, it is now faster and easier and more scalable, more affordable for minorities to start media companies online. And many people are. If you would like to talk about youth and access to power and access to communication, it is easier now than it has ever been. And as a party, we must stand with this movement and we must protect it from government regulation. We must deem it too important to put into the hands of the FCC. We must recognize that there is consumer choice. If Comcast is playing games, not affording you Netflix as fast as you want, you have a choice with your dollars. You can leave. But once the FCC, through President Obama's desire for control, for the very structure of their command and control-driven DNA, gets into that mess, content decisions will be made. I remind you of the Fairness Doctrine. If you had not lived under it, it's a fascinating piece of legislation that literally demanded equal time on the radio spectrum. It got so insane that when advertisers of Florida orange juice ran an ad on orange juice, a gentleman sued on behalf of another juice, I believe it was grape, and got free advertising. That is how crazy the Fairness Doctrine got. And it wasn't until a weird combination of Ronald Reagan and Jimmy Carter lifted that Fairness Doctrine that we ended up with the explosion on the talk radio spectrum through consumer choice. And now the genie's completely out of the bottle. Our party, our movement, conservatives have the moral obligation to protect it for this industry, but we also have the political obligation to stand in favor of this unencumbered communication device on behalf of people who have never had access to distributive media, on behalf of people who've never been able to build audiences, on behalf of opinion being unencumbered by Washington, D.C. We owe it to speak to the minority communities about using this device. We owe it to ourselves to speak to youth about using this in this way. And if we will do this, I challenge, I dare the President of the United States and the perfectly progressive movement that has become the Democratic Party in the House and in the Senate to stand up and say, yes, the FCC should not regulate, have anything to say about the priorities put on content flow online. I dare them. A perfectly progressive president with a perfectly progressive party, with a command and control structure, recognizing that this is a center-right country, looking at a world where opinion is no longer made at tea parties at the White House. It'll be an interesting bet to see if they follow. I ask you to support this when you talk with the legislators. I ask you to use the devices. I ask you to consider making it a part of what you do. And I ask us to make a commitment as a movement that we will sustain the moral obligation of this free communication device, and that we will also recognize the political opportunity before us to be the party that is demonstrably before the defense of ultimate free speech. And with that, I thank you.
Herman, we'll take questions. We got one of the great experts in this.
In the 90s, the Supreme Court issued a decision which overturned the one-house veto of new government regulations. The Congress responded by the CRA, the Congressional Review Act, which allows Congress to remove congressional executive branch regulations. And it also eliminates court review of those removals. Now, is there any reason that can't be used with the FCC?
No. I think the interesting thing about the FCC is it has been told by courts, you can't pursue this path. I mean, it's not within your framework. And the FCC has said, yeah. Is there a reason it can't be used? It strikes me that you have me at an advantage, sir, in your deep knowledge of that mechanism. It doesn't strike me as just a reason that it can't be used. But I think that when you're dealing with perfect progressives, it seems to me that those sort of inconvenient rulings are simply just inconvenient, that this president is willing to steer around them.
Well, and part of it was an effort to inform you to
Yeah.
dig into it because it may be one of your best defenses.
Good. Well, I appreciate it.
Congress has been very slow to use it, but it
Yeah.
has the power.
Good.
May I ask one more question relevant?
Please.
If you were Rush Limbaugh or Glenn Beck,
Uh-huh.
what would you be doing to try to protect yourself against the intent of the Obama administration?
Well, I'm neither Rush nor Glenn, and candidly, I don't have a TV. I think that both gentlemen are probably doing a pretty good job of that, right? I'm reminded of something I did listen to when you will recall when the president and Rahm Emanuel and David Axelrod made the decision to target Rush Limbaugh via Saul Alinsky's tactics, right? Pick a target, isolate it, freeze it, cut it off from the support base has become something that we progressives, or we, I'm not progressive, that we conservatives can repeat in our sleep. Limbaugh's response was remarkable. It was remarkable because he had studied the president's community organizing guru, and the president has made that admission about Saul Alinsky. And Limbaugh responded on the air, and I thought this was fascinating. He said to the president, he said in Rush's way, "Sir, you have forgotten Alinsky's teachings. I am not vulnerable. There's nothing you can give me or take from me. I need nothing from you." And he went on to explain that the president had forgotten that the target had to be vulnerable to isolation. And Limbaugh, in, again, his way, said, "In fact, sir, if you'd like to have this conversation one-on-one, I will fly EIB-1 out to meet you and fly you to Florida, and we can have a conversation about what it's like to fly in an airplane one bought with his own money." So Limbaugh took it head on, knew what was going on, educated himself, educated then, of course, his listeners. Beck, I'm less familiar with. But it appears to me if I were to protect myself as a media personality or someone dependent upon media, I would look again at where is your media going to flow. It's not going to be over the air. Right? Maybe in Limbaugh's case, car radios aren't going anywhere, but I would ultimately stand with this new delivery device being an opportunity to be completely unencumbered by government, and I would treat it as a vital stand that you have to take to protect that transmission device, right? And I would communicate that. Did that answer your question, sir? Okay, thank you.
Aside from net neutrality, I also heard a lot about this internet kill switch, which is like this idea that the president in a national emergency can turn off the internet. I was wondering if you think that's like on the level of a threat as net neutrality, and also like what that would entail, how that happens. Like, is there literally a switch, or what happens there?
Is there literally a switch? Wouldn't that be weird if there was like a big light switch behind him in the Oval Office and they said, "What about me?" I find it impossible. I literally find it impossible to believe that anyone who leads our country is capable of believing that he should have the right, he or she should have the right to shut down the internet in face of political dissent. I don't believe it about the President of the United States at all. I don't know that I care for the mechanism. I certainly don't believe it should be in the hands of government to be able to turn off the communication from people. I clearly just said that. I don't think that should exist at all. But cyber warfare is very, very real. And by the way, I mean, I've been a victim of this, right? You would be surprised if I told you, and I won't say in public, what some people in the progressive movement are willing to do to discredit a political party in terms of actual cyber warfare. But it happens all the time. Right, so our country is so vulnerable to this now. So many of our systems are connected. I believe there has to be some responsible methodology to be able to step in. If we were to be the victim of, let's say, I forget how to pronounce it, Stuxnet worm, Stuxnet, thank you, that has plagued the poor Iranians who are trying to peaceably just build a nuclear reactor because they're good folks. Right, we need to be able to defend against that. Right? So I guess on one hand, I'm saying that we need to be able to defend against it, but I don't know what agency, in which agency it belongs. Perhaps the military, right? Does that answer your question? If you're not familiar with that, that was it appears, and the conjecture is that Israel and the United States worked together on a piece of computer code that specifically targeted not just Iran, but specifically targeted their nuclear capabilities and ate its way into its system, and they can't seem to get rid of it. Darn the luck. It's terrible. Other questions? Oh, no.
I actually just wanted to make a comment, if I may, and share a recent example that pertains to the robo-notes. As we were campaigning against then candidate Obama, his digital team put forth a very concerted effort using the report abuse tools in the comments field, that when any negative comments were made regarding the candidate, a team from Blue State Digital was able to just report enough abuses that the publications removed those negative comments. So everything was positive in favor of the president. The other thing that I think you all should be on the lookout for that was taken advantage of, and only one publication wrote about it the last week of October, right before the election, was that Blue State Digital, who ran the operations for the campaign, did not have an SSL, a secure socket layer, attached to their donation pages. So it's a little bit of a conspiracy theory, but it would not be difficult at all to take thousands of $25 gift cards, run those through a system, and not be able to track those donations. And during the re-election campaign, I implore you, if you go to the page and don't see HTTPS in the field, to report that to somebody who will hopefully listen, because it was really abuse of the system.
Yeah, and keep in mind as well that this was also during the election campaign, someone within the president's election team made the decision to remove all fraud prevention techniques from the donation pages. And so what that means is you could go there and simply enter a credit card number and give money. You know, and we know that no one would ever do that outside of the bounds of the law. I mean, that would be wrong. But that was a choice they made. Yes, sir.
In this day and age of high tech, why is it so hard for the Republican National Committee and related entities to get on the same page to get the fundraising worked out in a much smoother way and fashion?
Yeah, well, it's a complex question. I mean, I think we made great strides this year in terms of online fundraising. Certainly the numbers show that from an online perspective. But I think you're talking, your question seems to me to be one about coordination, right? You said that, right? There are laws that prevent the committees from working on certain things together. But I'll tell you this, that the Democratic movement online has been so impressively well coordinated. And part of this, I believe, is honestly cultural. I think herding conservatives is a bit like herding cats. Right? We tend not to want to be controlled, and I see that the Democratic Party is very, very comfortable in a command and control environment, which is weird that we are not willing to do that. So I don't know how much of it has to do with technology or how much of it has to do with the recognition that everybody having their own donation page, everyone having their own donation platform, no one really sitting down to say, what is the master platform on our side? I think that's been one of the challenges. And we made a decision early on, because Chairman Seal gave us the leeway to do this, to really rebuild from the ground up a platform that had not yet gotten the love it needed. And Cyrus is much smarter than me, so he would have done the same thing, but wasn't given perhaps the leeway. I don't know. But we did that as well for our state, many of our state committees, to try to get them down to one platform. Right? So I think what it takes is a leader, a Newt Gingrich or a Speaker Boehner or a Haley Barbour or a Mike Duncan or a Morton Blackwell or someone else to stand up and say, look, let us get down to one platform. Let us get down to something that supports all of us, right? So that there is that sort of easy flow. So I believe it's cultural more than it is technological, but I think you knew that.
Hey, two more.
Maybe. Did I answer your question? Yeah, thanks.
When you said platform right now, what did you mean?
What did I mean when I said technology platform? I mean the underlaying, the girders on which the building stands. No, not the issue platform. No. We didn't rebuild that platform. No. In fact, I didn't have access to that platform. They didn't let me monkey with it. Weird. Yeah, I mean, there's the databases, there's the architecture, and technology is much like a building, right? I mean, it's built on a platform or a base, a structure, and around that then there's architecture built, and we can have a very long, geeky discussion about that, but we chose to go down to the framework, down to the base of the building, the basement, and rebuild from ground up.
Without overstating the obvious, I think many of us saw during the November elections that individual candidates having their own webpage was a saving grace, because it was a wake-up call for the RNC that we're not happy with the cohesive approach that was being taken, and it gave these other folks an opportunity to run and get elected. And my family, for our own selves, contributed directly to those candidates' pages rather than going to the RNC. So I think it was helpful.
Yeah, no, I've heard that a lot. And by the way, you know, nothing that you said hurts my feelings. You know, I think that sort of voting with your money is very, very effective. One of the things to recognize about the RNC is the RNC stands at literally a precipice of self-disaster. Okay? And the reason I say that is because the RNC has for a long time carried around a belief that the voter database they have protects them and indemnifies them from all real challenges. And that is a valuable piece of information. There's a lot of records in there, and brilliant people work on it, like Bill Steiner and other folks, you know, Gentry Collins. But the RNC must recognize that a committee structure that they have now, led by 168 really well-meaning good folks, cannot compete with an American Solutions, cannot compete with the Freedom Works in terms of being nimble, right? Or Americans for Prosperity, and because, I'll tell you this, because they're structured as businesses, right? People don't cycle in and out every 2 years, right? You know, people don't change things over every 2 years. There's a permanent business structure there, right? So you're talking about, you know, being unhappy with maybe the RNC's leadership or the perception that we, you know, pick candidates that some of the folks don't like. So your ability to go vote with your money is a good one, but your comment leads to a deeper concern I have about the committee, and that is to recognize the fact that it has to become more like a business-like structure, and it has to get out of the every 2-year cycles. And I think it also has to make clear what it does and doesn't do. And this is one thing just on the committee. Most people don't know what the committee does. And I would argue that most small dollar donors actually don't know what it does. And I know this from having spoken to people. A lot of people would think that John Boehner was Chairman Steele's boss, and other people thought Michael Steele was John Boehner's boss, right? So there's this confusion. So I think that needs to be addressed, but thank you very much.
Todd, thank you very much, and let me present you as a token of our appreciation, one of the Leadership Institute's Adam Smith ties. This is our newest model of Adam Smith tie. Thank you. Thank you so much. And next time you see Dick Armey, there's a reasonable chance he'll be wearing one of our Adam Smith ties, because Dick is a faithful wearer of these ties and has been for a very long time. Anyone here interested in Adam Smith ties or Adam Smith ladies scarves or other Adam Smith materials should contact Kathy Graham, my assistant, who's officed up on the 5th floor. I invite you all to join us next month on Wednesday, March the 2nd for our next Wednesday Wake Up Club breakfast. And anyone here who is interested in a tour of the Leadership Institute, if you would meet Whitney Strang here at the lectern. Whitney, where are you? Whitney, there. Just come on, stand up here. If anybody's looking for a tour, Whitney will give you an excellent tour. Thank you all for being with us this morning.